Okay, I think we should get started. Greetings, everyone. My name is Leslie Goodbody, and welcome to our TRIG Regulation Implementation Work Group meeting, where we have two groups of panelists. The one group of panelists is from the Infrastructure TRIG, and the other group is from the Rules Provision TRIG. So what I'm going to do is just start by giving you a recap of our first TRIG meeting. This is from the Infrastructure TRIG to give you an idea of how we got here. The main objective of our first meeting for the Infrastructure TRIG was to develop a deeper understanding of infrastructure challenges facing fleets and other stakeholders, and then use this information to plan for future meetings. During that meeting, panelists shared their top 3 infrastructure challenges, which were compiled into a list and then prioritized by our panelists and our audience members. Not surprisingly, pace and timing of infrastructure installations was the #1 concern, with cost concerns and grid issues coming up second and third. So because this same issue is also a primary concern raised at the last Rules Provision meeting, we basically learned that we should be talking about both subjects at the same time. I'm sharing my screen right now. This is the agenda for our meeting. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. At this meeting, we're going to be discussing the infrastructure delay extension provision in the ACF rule, followed by updates from the CPUC and utilities on the efforts underway to improve technical assistance at the utility level. And then we're going to follow with a facilitated discussion with panel members. And I'd like to emphasize here, I'm a real advocate of solution-based discussions, and so that's basically what we're going to be trying to do throughout this entire meeting today. So we also recognize that the infrastructure concerns that are raised by fleets that are subject to ACF have also been raised by transit fleets as they prepare to comply with the innovative clean transit regulation, as well as fleets that will be subject to the zero-emission forklift regulation being considered now. And although we'll be talking about the infrastructure delay extension in the ACF, this discussion really applies to all fleets looking to electrify. The intent of this meeting is to learn about how to initiate the process of working with your utility to get charging infrastructure projects approved, connected, and energized. We've invited representatives from 3 major California utilities who will discuss their technical assistance programs for transportation electrification, and they'll participate in a solution-oriented discussion on ways to improve this process. So now I want to go into introductions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to start with, with CARB. So if everyone from CARB could turn their cameras on, everybody else turn your cameras off. And then I'm going to let Annalisa, I'll start by myself, and I'll let Annalisa do a quick introduction of the rest of the CARB infrastructure team. I'm Leslie Goodbody. I'm a staff infrastructure specialist here at CARB, and I take great pride in leading these types of work group meetings to support infrastructure in CARB programs. Annalisa, would you?
Hi, I'm Annalisa Bevin, Zero-Emission Infrastructure Specialist for CARB, and really appreciate our team here facilitating this conversation. Andrew?
Andrew Martinez, Senior Advisor on Zero-Emission Infrastructure, and here helping Leslie manage this meeting today. Hello, everybody.
Okay, Tony.
Tony Rosell, Branch Chief, overseeing our regulatory development for medium and heavy-duty vehicles and the implementation efforts.
And then just real quick through the CARB rule provision team, the folks that are supporting the rules provision in ACF. I think that's Dorothy and Jimmy.
I'll start. Hi, everyone. My name's Jimmy Steele, implementing ACF and helping out with the TRIG Rule Provisions Group. Dorothy?
I'm Dorothy Fabiger. I am also helping implement ACF and helping out with the Rule Provisions TRIG.
And Jerry?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gerald Baruman. I work for Tony, and I am manager implementing the medium and heavy duty rules and regulations.
Cool. Okay, I think that's good for the CARB group. Let's move on to the infrastructure TRIG panelists. I'm going to keep my camera on since I'm a ringleader here, but if everybody who is a co-chair or a panelist can, and that means you get to too, Annalisa, co-chair or panelist for the infrastructure TRIG, turn on your cameras. And then maybe we can get a quick introduction from from Adam and Mark.
I'm Adam Browning with Forum Mobility, one of the co-leaders of the panel for infrastructure.
And Mark?
My name is Mark Perry. I'm an Energy Commission Specialist in the Freight and Transit Unit of the Fuels and Transportation Division at the California Energy Commission and a co-chair of the Infra TRIG.
I like it. Okay, and then how about we have Rebecca and Bradley? We'll have everybody else turn their cameras off and have the Rules Provision TRIG panelists and co-chairs with their cameras on.
Yeah, hi everyone. Rebecca Schenker, TRC, formerly GNA, and Leslie, and thanks so much for co-hosting this today with the Rules Provision Group. I think we're all really excited to talk about this overlap with infrastructure.
Bradley?
Hello, everybody. Bradley Northup, Public Works Superintendent for City of Carlsbad, co-chair to the Rules and Provisions TRIG. Happy to be here today and glad to have the conversation together with everybody.
All right. That was probably the quickest introduction I've ever done, so I'm pretty happy with that. So we have a lot to cover today. So I wanted to give a heads up on what we're going to be doing next. We're going to go through a number of presentations from our utilities, and starting actually with CARB and then PUC and then utilities. And I sense the most popular question that typically will come up is, will these presentations be posted? And basically, I think what you need to know is that the entire meeting right now is being recorded. And that will be a link to that recording, once it's closed captioned, will be posted on our meetings and events calendar. I think Andrew's posted a link to the meetings and events calendar in the chat. And that's in fact where a lot of things are going to be posted. In the presentations that are being given by a number of the presenters, there's only some that we're going to be able to post the entire presentation on CARB's website because the others don't meet ADA requirements. That said, there are a number of really valuable links that each one of our utility partners have included in their presentations. And Andrew will be using the chat feature to post those links as well as they come up in the presentation, so that everybody will have these handy links at their fingertips as the meeting proceeds. So now, without too much further ado, I am going to bring up the first presentation, which is from Jimmy, with Jimmy Steele, and he's a staff air pollution specialist at CARB in the on-road compliance assistance section. And as he said earlier, he's the lead guy on the infrastructure extension provision. And have I shared my screen yet? Not yet. Here we go. All right, hang on, give me 1 second. All right, do we have the opening slide there?
Not yet.
Oh, really? Why isn't it up? Okay, I'll try that again. Oh, you're right, it's not up. Sorry. Now it's up. Yep.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, I'll go to the next slide. Are we there?
Yeah, I see it.
Take it
Thanks,
away,
Leslie.
Tammy. Let me know when to go to the next.
Appreciate it, Leslie. Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy Steele, and I'll be providing an overview of the ZEV infrastructure delay extension and the required documentation to apply for the extension. But before I get into my script, I just want to echo some of the sentiment that I've heard here. I really think this is a great opportunity to express some of the challenges and some of the progresses that have been made. You know, California is ground zero for transitioning the transportation industry from fossil fuels to zero emissions. So, you know, there's going to be some challenges and lessons learned as we navigate this new realm. But all of us here are going to play a role in smoothing out the process. So I look forward to hearing the discussion that we are going to have today. So I'll jump right back into my script. So the ZEV infrastructure data extension allows for a temporary compliance extension to address situations where a fleet owner would become non-compliant with the ACF regulation due to infrastructure installation delays for some circumstances beyond their control. The extension provides more time to add ZEVs to the fleet if a project to install charging or hydrogen fueling infrastructure needed to operate the ZEVs is started 1 year ahead of the compliance date and it is delayed. The extension may be granted for up to 5 years, depending on specific circumstances. So if your California fleet is in compliance and the delay does not prevent your fleet from meeting the upcoming compliance deadline, there's no need to apply for an extension. However, if you take action 1 year ahead of your next compliance deadline to install ZEV fueling infrastructure and delays that are outside of your control prevent you from complying on time, you may request and receive an exemption if you meet the applicable criteria. The compliance deadline for your existing vehicles and how many ZEVs you need to comply depends on the compliance method you use. This extension is available for all compliance pathways and drayage trucks. Next slide, please. There are two primary categories of delays that are eligible for an extension. First is a construction-related delay for a project where the construction permit was issued 1 year prior to the compliance date, and the delay is a result of any of the following: delays in manufacture and shipping of ZEV fueling infrastructure equipment, delays due to a change of a general contractor, delays in obtaining power from a utility after construction begins, delays due to unexpected safety issues at the construction site, discovery of archaeological, historical, or tribal cultural resources, and natural disasters. If the eligible delay is due to construction-related delay, an extension may be granted for up to 2 years after the compliance date. Second is for a delay where the utility cannot supply enough power to the fleet's owner's site to support the required ZEVs, and the fleet owner receives documentation from the utility 1 year prior to the compliance date. Extensions for a site electrification delay sunsets on January 1st, 2030, and can no longer be used to support extension requests after that date. For a delay that is the result of an eligible utility power delay, the initial extension can be up to 3 years, with an option to renew the extension for an additional 2 years, based on the specific situation. The extension period and number of vehicles receiving an extension will be based on specific situations for the construction project or time the utility determines it needs to supply the required power to the site. The fleet owner must deploy the maximum number of ZEVs needed to meet its compliance obligations, and that can be supported by the utility, and must deploy any additional ZEVs that can be supported by utility upgrades to the site's electrical capacity each calendar year during the delay until the project is complete to maintain the extension. Next slide, please. To apply, first ensure proper timing. Fleet owners must apply for the extension 45 days prior to the applicable compliance date and show that the criteria to qualify for the extension has been met. Then send an email to truckers@arb.ca.gov with all required documentation. The type of documentation required is based on the type of delay and is laid out in the next few slides. After 3 years, if the utility cannot supply enough power to a growing ZEV fleet, then the extension can be renewed for an additional 2 years based on updated information. Next slide, please. For construction-related delays, there are 5 documents that need to be submitted when you email truckers. 1, documentation showing the executed contract for the ZEV fueling infrastructure installation is more than 1 year, and that date issued at least 1 year prior to the next compliance deadline. 2, documentation showing the reason for the delay is a result of eligible circumstances associated with the construction project. 3, a letter from the responsible official explaining the reason for the delay, the estimated completion date, an explanation why retail ZEV fueling infrastructure cannot be used by the fleet owner. 4, the documentation supporting the reason for the delay from the licensed contractor performing the work, related utility, building department, or other organization involved in the project. And 5, documentation of the executive ZEV purchase agreement. For more details, please see the ZEV infrastructure delay extension FAQ. A link is provided on the last slide of this presentation. This flowchart visualizes the ZEV infrastructure delay extension process due to construction-related delays. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, the fleet owners must have entered into a contract of 1 year or longer to fuel or charge ZEVs at the location, and must have a contract and construction permit for ZEV fueling infrastructure installation at least 1 year prior to the next applicable compliance deadline to be considered for the ZEV infrastructure delay extension. Then 45 days prior to the next compliance deadline, the fleet owner must submit a request for the ZEV infrastructure delay extension and submit the required documentation, which is summarized here and described in more detail in the previous slide. Next slide, please. This slide covers the site electrification delay extension type, which pertains to not obtaining enough power from the utility before a construction project starts. So there are 5 documents that need to be submitted when you email truckers. 1 is a copy of the application submitted to the utility requesting site electrification that is consistent with the number of ZEVs the fleet owner must deploy each calendar year to meet their compliance requirements during the requested extension period. 2, the utility's response showing that the project will take longer than a year, and the executed utility contract. If a utility is unable or unwilling to execute a contract, submit the initial contract or an application requesting site electrification to the utility, and a signed attestation from the utility stating that they will proceed with the project. 3, documentation indicating the reason for the delay, an estimate provided by the utility of the available electrical capacity in kilowatts the utility can supply to the site within 1 year of the extension request, and for each year of the requested delay, an estimated project completion date. Next slide, please. Information about the ZEV fueling infrastructure equipment that can be installed each year consistent with the utility's electric capacity estimate, including the number, type, and rated capacity for chargers in kilowatts, or the hydrogen station's dispensing capacity in kilograms per day, and the electrical demand in kilowatts. And 5, fleet owners with multiple sites where vehicles are domiciled must submit a copy of each site's infrastructure capacity evaluation from the utility or a third-party licensed professional electrical engineer to show no other site could be upgraded sooner. For more details, please see the ZEV infrastructure delay extension FAQ. A link is provided on the last slide of the presentation. This flowchart visualizes the ZEV infrastructure delay extension process due to delays in obtaining enough power to the site from the utility before a construction project starts. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, the fleet owner must have entered into a contract of 1 year or longer to fuel or charge the ZEVs at the location, and the utility has determined that more than time is needed to supply the power via executed contract or signed attestation at least 1 year prior to the next applicable compliance deadline to be considered for the ZEV infrastructure delay extension. Then 45 days prior to the next compliance deadline, the fleet owner must submit a request for the ZEV infrastructure delay extension, identify the site electrification delay time period, number of vehicle extensions, and submit the required documentation, which is summarized here and described in more detail in the previous slide. Last slide, please. And so here's a list of available resources that stakeholders can check out to get more information about the ZEV infrastructure delay extension and any other exemption or extensions available for compliant fleets. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation.
So I see a hand raised, but I just want to let you know we're going to be taking questions later because we have a number of presentations to get through. So that's going to happen After we get through the presentations, we'll start the discussion. So Em, are you ready to do your presentation?
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Truax with the CPUC. I work with the Energy Division section that focus on transportation electrification. Next slide, please. So I just want to start with, I'm sure most people on this call are familiar with the CPUC's mission and focus areas, but want to just highlight that the CPUC's goal, CPUC's role is to regulate the investor-owned utilities throughout the state. And we seek to ensure that there's safe, clean, and affordable services provided to all ratepayers. Specifically, when we're talking about transportation electrification efforts at the CPUC, there's 6 main categories that we are addressing or trying to ensure that is being provided to customers. So we oversee how the utilities design and implement electric rates to impact the cost of fueling. We oversee the utilities' efforts to timely energize customers to allow them to utilize their electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We're working with utilities to ensure that there's a proactive planning process to ensure the grid infrastructure can support the growing transportation electrification load that will be coming to comply with the state goals. We're working with the utilities to implement VGI policies, pilots, and enable technology to allow the VGI industry to move forward. We're working to have strategic planning for the charging infrastructure as it's being deployed and incentives are being provided. And we're evaluating the utilities programs and working with our interagency partners to ensure coordination and alignment with the state TE goals. Next slide, please. So one thing I think is most pertinent to this call today for everyone here is that the energization challenges that customers have been facing, and specifically the time it takes to receive the energization from customers. So historically, the utility energization process or pace has been able to keep up with customers' requests for the service. Recent energization efforts are showing that this is not the case right now, but primarily it's primarily due to the impact of the utility's ability to meet the growing need to deploy EV charging infrastructures efficiently. So the current length of energization timelines is a result of numerous factors, but California's ambitious climate and ZEV policies are resulting in more customers requesting service for new or upgraded load in a shorter time frame. The load requests are larger than previously requested and expect shortest within a shorter time period compared to historical loads like new housing or commercial developments. And trends reflect that the utilities are taking longer than previously needed to complete energization requests. But this, the commission is still reviewing the causes for this, but we are looking at the reasons that may include the number of new requests that each utility is specifically addressing in their queue. The need to balance the numerous priorities that they have to face, specifically safety and wildfire concerns, internal financial and resource constraints, and barriers outside the CPUC or utilities control that slow down the construction processes. Next slide, please. So the CPUC has numerous efforts underway to ensure that we are addressing the customer concerns when it comes to the timely energization of EV charging infrastructure. The distribution planning process improvements are being led by a proceeding called High DER, which is seeking ways to improve the utilities planning process to allow for more granular and improved inputs for how they are planning for EV load to come onto the grid in the future. The energization process and timeline improvements is being done through a recently opened energization LIR, which is seeking to establish timelines for how quickly establish expectations for how quickly the utilities will be able to energize customers moving forward, not just limited to transportation electrification, but all energization requests. And the freight infrastructure plan, and I will expand this to also include technical advisory services, is being handled in the transportation electrification OIR. This is looking at ways that the utilities will be discussing shortly for how they can work with customers to plan for EV charging before a request is being submitted to them for service, but also looking at ways that the utilities can better prepare or plan for new EV load coming onto the grid. Next slide, please. And finally, I will just talk about the energization OIR and let the utilities discuss their specific technical assistance programs moving forward. But the energization OIR, it seeks, for those that are familiar, the Commission in 2022 adopted a 125 business day average service energization timing target for projects that are requesting service from the utilities under their EV infrastructure rules. So these projects are, as I mentioned, they are limited just to projects going through the EV infrastructure rules, and they do exclude projects that need a Rule 15 upgrade or request more than 2 megawatts, and those that trigger those larger grid upgrades. But we're looking to expand on this initial effort and broaden it to the entire energization process as defined in AB 50 and SB 410. So while the scoping memo is not released or developed yet for this proceeding, what we can expect to be covered in this proceeding is the establishment of reasonable average and maximum energization timelines for the utilities to meet when addressing customers' energization request. So these will, as I mentioned, these will include the full energization process, not just those that are going through the EV rules, but also the Rule 16, Rule 15 upgrades, and those that trigger larger grid upgrades, such as a substation circuit or new feeder. We're going to be likely looking at ways to identify the steps of the energization process that we can help identify upfront for where the utility is responsible for completing these steps, where the customer is responsible for completing each step, and where a third party may be responsible, and what the reasonable timeframe for for completion of each step is. And we're also going to be establishing a venue for where customers can report prolonged energization delays to the Commission, so we can ensure that we have a proper accounting for how long these projects are taking. And while we do not know for certain yet, the future efforts may seek to direct the utilities to accelerate these processes where they are possible. And I believe that's it.
All right, thank you so much, Emmanuel. I'd like to bring up our next speaker. We're inviting Ramiro Lepe to the stage. Hang on. And Ramiro is with Southern California Edison. He's the e-mobility senior advisor. Ramiro helps medium and heavy duty fleets transition to electric through SCE's various TE programs, including Charge Ready Transport, which is a low to no cost infrastructure installation program designed specifically for commercial fleets. The mic is yours, Ramiro.
Thank you, Leslie. You took my lines. Oh my God, that was amazing. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ramiro Lepe, and I am the Senior Advisor on Southern California Edison's Charge Ready Transport program. And ultimately, what I do is I help fleets that are in that early stage of the process and really trying to identify where a fleet is at today, where the fleet wants to go. It is my job to help them build the bridges to how to get there through our various transportation electrification pathways. So Leslie, please go to the next slide. So one thing that has been a question when I'm talking to fleet operators or even stakeholders, such as a lot of people in this room, is how do we navigate that utility interconnection process? And if an EV infrastructure delay is needed, how does one go through SC to actually get the proper paperwork to submit to CARB to actually go through that request? Now, before diving into all those angles, there's 4 real elements that I want everybody here on this call to really walk away with today. The first one is the need for fleets and stakeholders alike to engage with their local utility early and often. And I know you guys have probably heard that a million times, and then the question gets, what does that even mean? Well, really, it's really understanding what the project is and know that we have to consider our utilities as a partner. And while we're considering us as a partner, also knowing that every EV infrastructure installation project is a major construction endeavor. And there's a million and one things that could actually occur. And I know there's a lot of stakeholders here on this call that install EV infrastructure and can attest to what I'm saying. Now, one of the things as far as takeaways are concerned is that Edison has a variety of different programs and support mechanisms to help a fleet operator from that very early stage of the process all the way through. And that's what I actually like to personally call our transportation electrification pathway. So Leslie, go to the next slide. Let's dive into those and see what those actually look like. All right, so as you see here, we support fleet operators at every stage of the electrification journey. All the way from very early stages when we're looking at the actual planning process. So we are taking fleet known plans into our grid planning efforts. Even if it's an estimate, even if it's something as simple as saying, Edison, we have 110 axle day cabs that park at this location. That information is actually really, really crucial. And if you stick with me till the end of this presentation, I'm actually going to share with you how a fleet operator right now today could actually share their plans that get incorporated into this process. As we start moving down the funnel, the natural line of progression takes us into some planning elements. So then the question of, well, how much power is available on the grid to my particular facility? So we have a tool, we call it Dr. PEP for short, but it stands for the Distribution Resource External Portal Tool. And in 5 clicks or less, a fleet operator or anybody on this call can actually get an estimate as to how much power is available, not only to the local circuit, but as well as to the local substation. Now, in developing projects, we understand that that is an estimate, and fleets want to know for certain, well, how much really is available? We do have an engineered analysis report that we could also conduct with fleet operators to give them that exact amount of power that is available today. And then taking a look downstream at their electrification initiative and say, well, if in 10 years you want to electrify 100 day cabs, how long is Edison going to take to actually bring power to your site? And these are the elements that are actually covered under that analysis. Now, moving in a little bit further along, we also have EV readiness study programs. We have grant writing assistance programs. We have several tracks for EV infrastructure installation to include charge ready transport, Rule 29, Rule 16, and a slew of other programs as well. Now, coming to market, we also do have a low loss reserve program and a drayage truck rebate program that we're also launching in about Q4 of this year. Now, once again, my job is to really uncover where a fleet is at today and then inject them into the right process as to how to actually achieve their initiatives through Southern California Edison. Leslie, we'll go to the next slide, please. Now, what does it actually take to install charging infrastructure at a facility? Now, as you look at this simplified process flow, you notice there's little stars on the left, and they're kind of small, but it indicates when fleets actually reach out to us and let us know, hey, Edison, we're looking to electrify our site. And that's usually always in the planning process and where our desired process, where our desired timeline is. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that every infrastructure project is a major endeavor. You're talking 1.5 to 2 years on average for distribution to the meter upgrades. You start getting into line extensions. Now you're talking 3 years plus. Substation upgrades, 6 years plus. And that is that reason why we want to know this information as early as possible in that decision to electrify, which you see a little icon there on the left-hand side. Now, all this takes us through a journey, right? We're going to go through the decision to electrify. It'll take us to customer planning, all the way through final design, crews starting works, and projects actually being electrified. The sooner that we're notified, the more support that we're going to be able to give our customers throughout the process. Leslie, next slide, please. Now, one thing that we are working on is our joint California IOU Technical Assistance Program. Now, this is slated to be launched in January of 2025, and there's 5 California IOUs that are participating. The entire goal of this premise is to provide technical assistance. In other words, the right program, the right resources to the fleet operator at the right time. So the intake process is going to look like this. There's going to be a web form when a customer actually requests information from Edison. They're going to be linked with an IOU technical advisor. And from there, we're going to actually look and see where they're at in the process today. That's going to include general education. It's going to include planning support, such as EV readiness studies, get into load management, automated load management, VGI opportunities. Going to get into installation, energization, interconnection support. So actually, how to actually apply to these various pathways. And all the way to post-vehicle installation support. Those are for the fleets that have already adopted vehicles and now are looking at that phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 deployment potentially. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is make sure that we are providing the enabling customer electrification success and walking the customer through all the process that they need in order to achieve their electrification initiatives. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, if we get into a point where a customer does have to indeed request a utility infrastructure delay, here's a process of how a fleet can actually go through that through Edison, Southern California Edison. The first step is we actually have to have a customer complete an application. whether that's into our Charge Ready Transport program or tariffs Rule 29 or Rule 16. From there, there is a site visit that is conducted. So there we're going to determine the potential source to serve newly requested service. It is at that point that we do a load capacity study. After the load capacity study, if it is determined that the infrastructure is actually necessary to get a delay request, the customer would have to actually request that delay notice to SCE. And then Edison, we're going to turn around and provide the following supporting documentation. That's going to include the reason for delay, the available capacity that is on the circuit and on the project today, and what that phasing strategy will look like for every year that the request has actually been made. Estimated project completion date is another element that we would include. And also documentation showing that SCE is actually moving forward in the process. In other words, we need to make sure the customer is providing us with sufficient confidence that they are committed and actually moving forward with the actual project. All right, Leslie, we'll go to the next slide, please. All right, guys, so I know I shared a lot of information with you guys today. Now, there is my contact information. If you guys want any of these slides, any of these resources, I urge you to reach out to me directly. There is also context there for our various pathways, which is the Rule 15, 16, 29, Charge Ready Transport, or even our advisory services, programs like grant writing assistance and EV readiness study. But here's the interactive portion of the actual presentation. If you guys happen to have your cell phones out, scan that link icon. And one of the things that we are requesting is for fleets and stakeholders to share their plans with us as early as possible. This information literally goes into our grid strategy team, which then utilizes that information into our grid planning efforts. Now, the link icon that you see is an actual survey. If you have a free-form submission, you could also email us at tep@sce.com, and that'll also go to that same team that is actually doing that work. Thank you, Leslie. We'll throw it back to you.
Action-packed, appreciate that. And also just want to remind people that all of the links that were in, I think the third slide in Ramiro's presentation were also posted in the chat. The next speaker we have is from PG&E, Nima Yazdi. He's the strategic analyst. He's a strategic analyst at PG&E working in the Clean Transportation program. And I want to just hopefully bring you up to the camera, turn your mic on.
Hi, yes, Leslie. Hi, everyone. My name is Nima, and I'm a strategic analyst at PG&E. I'd like to start our presentation by thanking Ramiro to SCE for the insightful information and the amazing presentation. I'd also like to give a shout out and also gratitude to the CARB staff and all the other stakeholders on the call who engage in our programs. At PG&E, we take pride in serving our customers and understand the challenges you face when planning, implementing, and eventually energizing or interconnecting to the grid. We hear you, and we're committed to making this process smoother and more efficient, and I'll be discussing that on this next slide and some of the ones following. Before I dive into this content, though, I'd like to recognize that lengthy timelines and complex procedures can be very frustrating, and we want to assure you that we're actively working to address these issues. Our goal at PG&E is to streamline our processes, reduce wait times, and provide you with a seamless experience to start from finish that can be replicated over several projects. So your feedback is invaluable to us, and we're listening closely to your concerns. And by working together, we hope that we can make significant improvements and assure that you receive high-quality service that you deserve. I plan on sharing my personal contact information in the chat once I'm done speaking, and encourage you to reach out if you want to discuss individual projects or different ways that we can improve. We've developed this EV customer roadmap that you're seeing on the slide right now to serve as the foundation for an effective conversation to discuss various aspects of a project lifecycle. The top of this roadmap, just to level set, includes some hot links to various resources, FAQs, and tools that can support a strategic dialogue. And a link to this webpage and this roadmap is going to be socialized with everyone in the chat as well. The actual roadmap itself highlights the customer journey from start to finish, beginning from left and ending at the right. And these are areas in which a customer or utility might be responsible for various deliverables or dependencies, highlighted based on the green or blue colors. Beginning at the application phase number 1 on the far left, we've improved our online portal to support customers by incorporating their feedback to make the tool easier to use for TE-specific customers with unique dropdowns and very insightful questions we ask beginning on in the project to help speed up processes down the road. I'd also like to highlight the pre-assessment process, number 3, and our efforts to support quicker decision-making and more timely responses. This is something that we've struggled with in the past, and we know that customers can determine circuit capacity, or we realize that through this process, customers are able to determine circuit capacity, view a preliminary design, and understand their responsibilities in a shorter period of time. We know that we've heard from developers and large mature EVSP customers that you need to make quicker high-level decisions, especially when it's related to siting, and we hope that this PA process can support those decisions. The remainder of this journey map is pretty self-explanatory, and in the interest of time, I want to proceed to the next slide where we discuss some process improvements. So I wanted to have a little bit of fun with this slide and kind of break away from the standard utility talking points that you typically hear. And in this slide, what I wanted to do was illustrate some of the common customer experiences we've observed with our TE customers and their associated pain points. So I've outlined 3 customer experiences that we've seen often, and then I'll highlight solutions we've developed based on customer feedback. So starting from the left, customer number 1 is capacity constrained, and they feel the pressure to start electrifying their site quicker than we can provide the capacity. So vehicles are available, they see the demand, but capacity is taking much longer than they were hoping. The pain point we've determined internally is that roughly 20% of our EV sites, 20%, receive load limit letters due to capacity constraints. Customer number 2 feels challenged with our large load study due to its cost and time frame. We've learned that roughly half of our EV applications have been canceled, and part of the reason is due to our inability to respond quick enough to provide quality information to support customers with directional decision making. And finally, customer number 3 is seeking the quickest path to energization and doesn't really feel well supported by our ICA maps. We've tracked our cycle times, and we've determined that nearly 80% of project cycle times are spent in the construction and dependency phases. So if we jump to the next slide, not 2 slides, but 1, we've got some solutions. Our solutions are pretty multifaceted. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but I'll start from the top where we've definitely made improvements to the ICA capacity maps. SoCal Edison and other utilities within California are also supporting this effort as well. And our goal is to provide better forward-looking and planning visibility for customers. We've also bolstered our internal planning tools to respond quicker to customer capacity requests. We've engaged with our customers to collect future planning information to prepare the grid for targeted future capacity upgrades. So we've asked for their input on ways that we can improve and where they see, based on data of vehicles or sites, we can start building capacity in advance of customer requests. We've also transitioned to a single point of contact from a project management perspective to alleviate the challenges of working with several lines of business at PG&E. So the single project manager provides a relationship-based relationship and has been very well received by our customers. It reduces miscommunications and in general allows us, our representatives, to gain a better understanding of your portfolio needs. And the last point I'll touch on in terms of solutions is a new program we're testing called Flexible Service Connections. And this is a program that provides dynamic day-ahead signals to customers who are facing capacity constraints. So this allows us to serve customers on an interim basis while capacity upgrades are completed, and allows those customers to receive signals sent from the utility through DERMS and SCADA equipment to receive better interim capacity. Can we jump to the next slide, please? Great. So first of all, shout out to Romero for discussing the TA advisory services. That was a great summary. We're all really excited about this in California in terms of the IOUs. PG&E was also recently approved for a unique transportation electrification advisory services program we call TEAS. This is unique because it's designed to help medium and heavy duty fleets of schools, transit agencies, and small businesses, mainly located in priority communities, to accelerate their vehicle electrification. This program would advise fleets on electrification planning, capacity guidance, implementation coordination, and post-energization guidance. While I have this opportunity, I want to give a special shout out to the CPUC staff for approving the TEAS program just last week. We're ready to roll out this program in the next 1 to 2 quarters, and we appreciate their partnership to support our customers. I want to focus your attention on the orange box on the right-hand side. We understand that pre-energization support is a pain point for customers, and we're developing solutions to be more supportive and engaged. We're planning on supporting customers with strategic site selection and application support, all while utilizing a single point of contact to navigate the journey. In the future, we hope to expand this offering to all customers, likely in early 2025 in alignment with other IOUs. I'm looking at the clock right now and realizing that I'm out of time. So out of respect for LADWP and the other presenters, I'm going to conclude. Please skip the appendix slides that you'll see in the next 2 or 3, which can be referenced during the Q&A if questions come up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nima. That was great. Do we have Gregory available?
I'm right here.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Gregory. Gregory's Sarvis is an electrical engineer with the Los Angeles Department of Water Power Electric Transportation Program. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. Special thanks to CARB, CEC, and the CPUC. I see a lot of partners and customers here in the chat today. So happy to be with you. Thank you, Ramiro and Nima, for really teeing everything up. I'm not going to go into a great detail about interconnections with utilities because these guys already started that. But I will give a little bit of a flavor for how we do things in Los Angeles. So on the first slide here, the top graph is very much similar all across other utilities. We have a distribution system that needs to come from the public right away onto your property. Typically with larger services for trucks, we're going to be talking about putting a pad mount transformer owned by the utility. We'll install a meter in the switch gear that you need to procure. Everything from that meter onto the choice of the charger, the choice of the vehicles is up to you to provide, and then the utility will provide the electric service for that. Down at the bottom is the Charge Up LA rebate program that my team runs. We give rebates for light duty chargers, but also particular interest to everybody here would be the segment for medium and heavy duty vehicles. We provide rebates for up to $125,000 per charger, depends on the power output, with a maximum up to $500,000 per site. So please head on over to our website. You're not going to see a lot of links in this presentation because of the limitations that we had. But I'm going to go ahead and put them in the chat right now. Everything that you see, we can find at ladwp.com/EV. The next slide is a picture from our capacity maps, similar to the ICA maps from PG&E or the Dr. Pep tool from SCE. We also have a website where you can go in, type in your project's address, and see where is LADWP's infrastructure, and is there available capacity on that line nearby. That will help you trying to cite a place where you may have a couple of different choices. You can go to where there is capacity. If it says no capacity, do not think that that means you are not going to be able to interconnect, and that is not a reason for an exemption. Please come and bring us your plans, and we need to work on upgrades on the utility side to make that possible. The next slide is kind of a very high-level roadmap of what needs to be done before you even approach the utility is the top 3 boxes. Identify your facility needs. What vehicles are you going to have? What routes are they going to operate? What kind of duty cycle? What kind of dwell time do you have? That determines the power level of the charging that you'll need. After you've solved all that, then you can select chargers, put together some engineered documents, and then submit them to LADWP. We'll then pair you with an engineer who will review the design and give you the customer service requirements to be able to build out that site. And if you can click twice, Leslie, I think there's, an overview at the bottom there. And then the next slide talks about our feasibility study report, which is an option that you can start before requesting service. You give us less information. You don't need engineered documents, basically need a napkin sketch of where you're going to put the equipment and a rough idea of what chargers you need. That will give you some preliminary information. We'll give you a cost estimate, rough order of magnitude of the time that it will take us, and where we'll serve the system from. There is a nominal fee for that, $1,500, which can then go toward the actual service upgrade if you choose to proceed. It takes us 28 days to turn this around, but I say 1 to 2 months because of some time processing the request and the payment. The next slide goes into what the general process for EV charger installation. So 3 different phases that we go through. The preliminary phase is where you submit your application and submit your documents. We have an engineer who looks at that and then gets back to you and says, this is the determination of what's going to be needed. The next slide shows the 3 different paths that you may go down with in design and construction. The first one, a type 1 project as we call it, is an adequate facility. That's where there's no construction on the utility required. You basically get a letter that says your existing electrical infrastructure is ready to go for your project. Let us know when you're connected. Type 2 project is where we're going to need some sort of an upgrade on the utility, but it's usually the stuff that we own that is on your site. So that transformer may need to get upgraded, some cables. This is about a 1-year project. The type 3 projects is where there's going to be a new DWP equipment installation, perhaps a line extension involved. These are our 2 to 3 year typical timeline projects, although some of them can get longer based on the project scope. The last slide goes over to some of the different timelines for the larger upgrades that need to be done on the utility side. I don't want to scare anybody showing 10 years on there, but that, like Ramiro had led to, these go into our capacity plans as we're planning the grid. So please, when you approach us, we want to know ultimately how much power are you going to need. Don't just come and come up with your plans for the next year or two. If you know that you are electrifying an entire yard, we need to take that into consideration so we can get started on some of those upstream projects that have a longer lead time. I went 25 seconds over my 5 minutes, but I'm going to stop it there and look forward to your questions later.
Awesome. I appreciate your expeditious work on these slides. I think what I'm going to do right now is, before we go into the facilitated discussion, give everybody a 5-minute bio break. We're gonna meet back. And after that, just super quick, like, let me give you a time. How about let's shoot for 1:57, 5-minute bio break. And then we're gonna focus on the focus discussion. So I just want to remind people that before we get back in, what we're going to be doing is with the panelists, we're going to use the hand raise feature. I'm going to tee up topics to talk about. So I'm really hoping that we are focusing on the specific topic at hand with our questions. And as we have this discussion, panelists will raise your hand. Our co-chairs will help facilitate that discussion. And then if we have questions and input from the public or the audience, they're going to be instructed to type their questions into the comment feature. And I'm asking Andrew to track these, curate them, and interject those questions into the discussion where they fit. And so super quick, we're joining back in at 1:57. All right, we're back. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I want to just kind of start that discussion. Let me just escape out of this first. Okay, so let's start the facilitated discussion. Maybe I should just wait a couple minutes for people to get back in. And maybe I will know that if panelists turn on their cameras. That's the agenda document. There we go. We're getting people. Okay, let's see. Okay, we have some hands raised, and I haven't even teed up my first thought. So before we do this, I just kind of want to channel the discussion a little bit. And what I did was I ended up grouping the first 2 bullets because it does seem to be they seem to be very similar: application procedures and documentation. And this is sort of this is for the purpose of identifying those issues and improving the process. And so the types of things I want us to be thinking about are the types of clarifications that are needed from the utilities on process and timing. So if you have questions, comments regarding that, and do we need clarification on how the process for applying an ACF delay extension and that process in the context of following the utilities processes and procedures? So that link between what ACF requires and what the utilities require and provide. And then also what type of documentation the utilities, what type of documentation do they provide to indicate where an applicant is in the process? of that infrastructure delay provision. What does the applicant need to show CARB to demonstrate they qualify for an extension? Are there adjustments that could be made to these procedures that could better align communications between fleets and utilities pertaining to an infrastructure delay application, or an infrastructure application to the utility, or an application to CARB for a delay extension? So I'm really trying to link and align these two aspects of working with the utility to get energized with working with CARB to get your delay extension approved. So that's the gist of where I was hoping that conversation could go. And I also I've got Annalise, I've got all my co-chairs here, and I kind of want them to help also with the facilitation of the discussion. But I think for starters, we can just let's start with John, since he's the first one with his hands up on my Zoom square.
Me, thank you. The question I had relates to multiple sites, right? I think we saw the one slide with the utility issue. If you had multiple sites, you had to deal with, you had to say where you were going to be in all the sites, but that also looks like it's one utility. So if you have a construction issue, do you have to literally apply to each utility if you have multiple sites up and down the state? Or can you apply to, if there's one issue at one site, but you haven't started construction on a different site, how does that work? So it's more of a sort of a global question. Do I have to go to every utility and every site, start everything at once in case I can't get something? Or if I can't get something at one site, it's pretty clear to me, you go to the utility, you go to CARB, right? To me, that's much more simple than the bigger question of, do I have to go to every utility at once for every site right off the bat? So that's my sort of high level question.
I think what I'm going to do is start off with my understanding of the process. You are, I don't think one utility is going to be stepping outside their territory. But the streamlining process that they're talking about in these presentations would hopefully make it so that the processes between utilities are not too dissimilar. And I see Jimmy turned on his camera, and I'm thinking this also could be that conversation where, since John, you're not necessarily representing a specific fleet, right? You're from an industry group, right?
I'm part of SEEB, and we have multiple entities with multiple facilities.
Yes.
So the idea is, if you have things in 4, 5, 10 utilities, do I have to reach out to every single one of them before I get an exemption in any single one of them?
Oh, that's a rules provision question, Jimmy.
Yeah, so if you have a fleet that has multiple sites, they will need to submit an application for each site. So a utility application for each site where the vehicles are domiciled will be required. That's outlining the site's electrical capacity.
So just to be clear, if I wanted to just do my Sacramento facility or my LA facility and not my Fresno, Redding, Bakersfield, Barstow facilities first because of whatever, I still have to, before I get any exemption for anywhere, I have to have shown that I've tried everywhere. And that's my question.
It's site specific. So if you have a compliance deadline coming up for one particular site, that's where you're going to want to submit the utility application for that site.
But the compliance deadline is not for my site, it's for my fleet, my California fleet.
It's for the vehicles domiciled at that specific fleet. I mean, at that specific location.
Well, Milestone says I have to do as much as I can across the whole fleet before I can be out of in compliance. So I'm really looking at my whole fleet, and that's the sort of the question. I know Tony just popped on, but to get a compliance with my vehicles, I have to have my infrastructure, but infrastructure seems to be set up solely for a site. So that's the connection. I'm just trying to, and maybe this is the wrong forum, but that's my initial big picture facility question. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So no, and John, you're right. I mean, the concept is if you have 5 locations, keep a simpler number, then strategically we would expect you to identify the locations you can do and meet the deadline, and prioritize the project there rather than finding the only one that will take 10 years and all the others can be done immediately, and then trying to use that as an exemption. The idea is to encourage you to look at your options to then figure out your compliance strategy. And just to elaborate a little, the language in the regulation does say that if you do have multiple sites, then it's either going to be a utility capacity evaluation or a third-party licensed professional engineer can also provide that assessment.
Right, but that sort of implies that it's the single utility, right? If I have multiple sites in one utility for power, I mean, maybe I'm missing the
Yeah, no, I mean, again, broadly, it doesn't limit it to any one utility. It is if you have, let's do a simpler number. If you have 2 sites and one is in Edison and one's in PG&E, it's go to both utilities, look at the assessment. If one can be done timely and you can place your vehicles there, then we would expect you to move forward with that, and then possibly still move forward with the other one that might take 3 or 4 years to get out there, but that you would be acting in a manner to start phasing in the ZEBs and moving forward with the projects that can meet the timelines.
So I'll be quiet after this, but just to be clear, what I think I heard was to get an exemption, to qualify for an exemption, you really have to apply everywhere where there's a site to make sure that CARB doesn't feel like you picked the worst site, right? So you have to, if there's, we'll go with your 5 example, you have to literally reach out to 5 utilities, do 5 applications, pay 5 fees, 5 engineering studies, and then if 4 of them look bad, you have to do the infrastructure at the one that looks good. I'm just not judging. I'm just saying that's what I think I heard.
It's largely that's consistent with what's written, again, but you do have the choice of whether you go through the utility application process or do the engineering evaluation. Either would meet that criteria.
Okay.
Jamie had his hand up next.
Thank you, Leslie. Hey, let me broaden John's questions and comments as it relates to trucking and what we see in our own efforts. We've deployed the largest fuel cell truck fleet, Class 8 fuel cell truck fleet in North America under the Hydrogen Hub program that is likely to expand significantly, taking into account that many of the fleet operators are seeing clear advantages with fuel cell applications. We have a number of truck OEMs who are moving forward towards fuel cell trucks to be able to operate not just short haul, but regional haul and the like. And virtually all of these fleet operators are not tethered to, especially the drayage, to a specific station. They will be reliant on a network of stations. And so I see a couple of issues that I think CARB has to address. And I would strongly encourage that CARB interact with ARCHES, which has now a funded program from the federal government, $1.2 billion, plus other funding that will come from the state, on how that network plays out. Because the fleets who are going to rely on that network aren't building that network. And yet the vehicles that they will use to do their daily duty cycle are likely for many to be fuel cell trucks. And it isn't to say that they won't have, in some instances, battery electric, but I would argue that a great number of them are going to look to fuel cell as the answer to what their duty cycle requirements are. And the biggest challenge is going to be on hydrogen supply, access to stations, and the price of the fuel. And ARCHES is focused on addressing those issues. That's what the federal government came through with. So I think this ACF effort has to spend some time with the ARCHES group to address those questions. And one last comment with respect to the presentation by the California PUC, we're looking at more than 2 megawatts of power requirements. I mean, especially with hydrogen and hydrogen production, getting larger power interconnects has been a huge challenge, continues to be a challenge as acknowledged. And this is going to come down to affect what the fleets can do, the ones that have to buy the trucks. So I think these comments and concerns need to be addressed if we're going to properly affect this rules.
Thanks, Jamie. Did anybody want to respond to anything Jamie said, or we just keep going down the list? Lisa, you had your hand up next.
I can just respond to the
Okay,
comment
great,
about the
thanks,
PUC real quick.
Yeah.
And to be clear, the 2 megawatt exemption was just for the EV infrastructure rules, but with the recent passage and signing of AB 50 and SB 410 and the opening of this energization OIR, we are looking we can't limit these energization requests based off of the capacity that's being requested. So those 2+ megawatt sites are going to be 2+ megawatt projects are going to be considered when we're developing these average and maximum timelines in compliance with the legislation.
Yeah, and just to that point, it's going to put a real damper on the ability to get hydrogen at the volumes that the state is committed to under the ARCHES program. So we have a real conflict here, and that comes right around to affect all these fleet operators who are trying to figure out how they're going to meet their duty cycle requirements with the right technology and to be able to afford to do it under this regulation.
Thanks,
so I'd
Jamie.
say this is a serious issue.
Yeah. Lisa has her hand up, and I'd like to try to see if we can get the focus back to the reporting side of things, because that has been a lot of the questions that have come up from our team. Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm looking at the question. So the application and procedure process, I think my experiences are we've got 2 projects going on right now at Tom's Trucks in the CRT project. And we're at over 2 years right now. We started in December 2021. So where I see as an application opportunity is CPUC brings up the quality of service. PG&E brought up the Transportation Advisory Group. I think there lacks the transportation industry being and having a seat at the table. There's a big disconnect when it comes to these processes, understanding what the requirements are, ingress, egress, parking stalls, safety for large trucks. And that becomes design and just on the ground experience. It's just not there on the utility side. They're farming out some of these projects with other teams. There's a big disconnect on following a process and a procedure that is outlined within the process, but it's not upheld by the utilities. And so I'm kind of curious when it comes to the rules on the 2 megawatts on that 125 business days, what we can do when it comes to some of these processes, because considering that we've got these mandates and considering that we've got fleets that certainly want to do this, these lack of quality of experiences are creating difficulties all by themselves. So for example, things that we've lost out on in our project, if we would have had just construction beginning, we were ready to go to construction with our installation construction team, and we had CD construction design 100s done. We've had over a year delay with the utility not giving us any updates. They refuse to give us the updates because they say that we're not allowed to have them. And so we lost out on 80% of depreciation from 2023. I think that's an easy fix. I also have seen that long pole items like switchgear, which we've requested to have, procured way in advance of projects. Those are things that can be fixed again. All you have to do is understand what's a long pole item, come up with a plan B, and share the designs, give transparency, and let's see, the schedule as it relates to milestones requires the fleet to have vehicle acquisition plans, have charging equipment, all has a schedule that has a requirement to be met, which is an investment of millions of dollars. And when you align that with Energize, because we did that also, we went to also other projects with Energize, and we're already delayed with our 2-year getting live and commissioning on our award with Energize. And so that's got an opportunity for a fix when it comes to this process, because simply, if we could just start construction, we've already bought the equipment, which is millions of dollars worth of equipment. If we would just get started and we light up the switchgear and the transformer later, we could solve 2 problems: depreciated opportunities in the tax year, and as well as getting the invoice paid by Energize. Because we have the invoices paid, but we can't submit anything until we get construction started. So I think those are 2 big opportunities. And then lastly, the demand tariff rates, when you discuss it with the utilities on these transportation projects, most of these project managers and have no idea what we're talking about, and trying to, again, try to connect the dots to build a model internally for yourselves. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement with these different teams that are emerging from these CPUC regulatory people, but it's not connecting on the utility side. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, if anybody wants to chime in, otherwise I'll just go to the next person. Brett?
I'll pause briefly to see if anybody else is coming off mute to answer that one. And away we go. Brett Stevens, Daimler Trucks. Just wanted, I hate sticking down this rabbit hole, but my experience has taught me anything. There's really no ability to properly time the vehicles and infrastructure. And there's always a chance for stranded assets on either side. Not, again, looking for a direct answer, but the question that comes up is, if the utility does not quote an accurate energization timeline, the fleet could have stranded assets either on the vehicle or EVSE side, given the 1-year kind of runway that's being accepted. I just, again, don't want to dive too deep into it, but just want to advocate for our customers that when they're acting in good faith, there should be an avenue for enforcement discretion around some of those timelines being asked. And then lastly, as it relates to the other sites needing to be assessed, not every site is created equal. Not every site utilizes trucks in the same way. You are driving away from technology agnosticism, where fleets that want to have either consistent assets in their fleets, so consistent OEM assets, either from serviceability or driver training. There just needs to be some acknowledgement that just because a site can be electrified does not mean it's in the critical path for that fleet to pursue their compliance through the existing technology today as it continues to develop and improve over time.
Thank you. Rebecca, one of our co-chairs, maybe.
Yeah,
have you chime in?
Thank you. And I want to just start with an appreciation. I can see how far along the TE advisory services and kind of fleet onboarding pathways have come from each of these utilities. I mean, I think most of us have been at these workshops for 5 or more years. We've been working on these large scale projects that have led the way for this, but I can even see this difference in what's available and the knowledge and the programs you're putting into place. But I think that what I also want to underscore that I heard from the PUC and from each of the utilities is that this takes a lot of time. And what I saw on each of those timelines is that it does not align with what we're seeing in the regulation right now. And that's where my big concern is. I want to just start by saying, if we're talking about fleets that need to meet 10% of Group 1 requirements, depending on what the fleet you are, how large that group is, if they didn't already have large infrastructure plans under development prior to the approval of the regulation, they're already behind and unable to get any infrastructure exemptions. We needed to have those construction permits in place by the end of 2023, as well as the associated vehicle orders. And so I want to just really dive in on what that means and what can we do, right? And what can we do for fleets that are potentially nearing challenging timelines for 2027. If we're talking about the beginning of 2027, fleets are going to need to have either permits in hand or enough permits in hand to get to their 10% 2027 goals by the end of 2025. That's less than 2 years away. And I think we're talking today about the utility side, we're talking today about the CARB reporting side, but I think there was acknowledgement that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the fleet side to design, to procure, to understand EVSE, to understand what's realistic from an implementation technology side from the OEM that suits the local requirements. And so we're talking about 1 year and 8.5 months to have those full plans kind of set and to have documentation potentially from across the state from multiple utilities showing that you're unable to energize the appropriate amount or to have permits in hand at multiple locations across the state. And these things take time. They take a lot of time. That's what we're hearing. That's what everyone's saying today. So I want to what can we do for fleets that are doing their best? What can we do for utilities that are clearly working as fast as they can to meet complicated statewide energy challenges that, the data presented today showed that these slowdowns are real. Most people we're talking about under ACF are talking about 2+ megawatt projects. So to get into the rules provision side and the infrastructure TRIG implementation side here, these challenges are real and they're acknowledged by everyone. The rule is really, really strict in terms of what is allowable. And my concern is that we're not going to be able to provide you with the required list of documentation. And we're going to have fleets doing their best who are literally already non-compliant, despite the fact that they haven't reported yet for the end of this year, but they're not going to hit their 2025 targets. They're already behind for 2027. What interim What can we do to help demonstrate that we are doing everything feasible in a world where everything feasible still might not get us to these requirements? What is the flexibility here? What are the ways that we can build flexibility? I think that's the question, because I'm hearing from everyone on this call that the timelines are ambitious, the need is ambitious, but what if we're still doing our best and not getting there?
So I'm not sure, I want to move to the next question because that was really, really great tee up of a question. Yeah, I see Tony's.
I'll provide a short comment at this point. I mean, so in terms of, for example, the 2027 timeline that you mentioned, by regulation, we're saying, hey, by the beginning of January 2026, you should have taken a number of steps. And if you did, and it's going to be 3 more years after that, before the project is ready, that's the way the language was crafted, is to be able to provide those extensions, provided those basic criteria are met, and they are outlined, I think, relatively clearly. And so for me, it's like, well, so I understand that the end of this year is a much tighter timeline. But to the extent that we wrote the reg language with the concept of somebody who is trying to work with their utility to move forward would largely have this information or these steps or the engineering evaluation in the timeline. And so that gives you a whole nother 1.5 years or almost 9 more months, almost 2 years to plan for 2027. And then if you do encounter that it is going to be a longer time frame, then it sounds like you would be meeting the criteria in the rule, and so that is would be perfectly consistent with what it says, and you would get the extension in that example.
Okay, so for 2027, if we need to do that, I'm dealing with fleets that don't have 1 or 2 or even 5 locations, to go back to what John brought up. I'm dealing with fleets that have 15, 20, 50 locations. And so we're talking about submitting applications or for every single one of those to tier it. There's not a clear sense of what we're doing when we're actually planning for a statewide transition, and we're already behind. Like we are all behind for 2027 if we have to demonstrate at multiple utilities across the state that we've done our due diligence versus, hey, this ran into challenges and then we went to this, then this ran in, we said that this site looks the best for these operational reasons, for this OEM specific reason, for these route required reasons. We're able to get this much power here. Then we're looking at this site if we're not able to get more power. Then we're behind on all of those timelines. And we're doing our best. I just want to, if you're talking about smaller operations, there might be some ability to get there for 2027. I think it's the larger, more complicated ones where this is a huge amount of documentation and process. And we're not going to be able to prove that we're committing it at every single utility. We're not going to have a contract or even a proof of commitment if that project doesn't make sense. Like there's things along the way that are part of this documentation list that are going to take a long time, possibly more than 1 year and 9 months. And that doesn't even speak to the fleets that are already out of compliance for 2025. Mm-hmm. So we're gathering this, we're gathering everything we can, but the question is, what happens if this doesn't work?
And one of the reasons for having this meeting is to find out, are there any disconnects in what the utilities would be doing and the way we wrote the language? Because right now I think you're identifying a situation that's conceivably possible, but at the same time, if somebody is planning and runs into these barriers, I think the language largely addresses it. So I'm not clear that it wouldn't. And I guess we can continue this particular dialogue on the rule provisions meeting that's coming up in a couple weeks, because I would like to get more feedback as to, are there any things that we can help do to improve consistency among utilities? That broader question of, hey, if I'm going to try to get an initial assessment, is there a more streamlined way to do it before I decide exactly which site to move forward with or which sites to move forward with? I think it'd be helpful to have some discussion on that too. And to be clear, just to everybody on here, the regulation is already written. We're not modifying the regulation at the time. We're working with what it says, and we're going to implement based on the criteria. And to the extent that there are disconnects, we'd like to become aware of them. But that anything that's going to be changing the rule requirements is a rulemaking and is a multi-year process in and of itself.
So Tony, this is Lisa. I agree with you. When we take probably maybe a deeper look into what you guys did do with graciousness for some of these extensions. I agree there's probably something we can work with there. But I think on corrections for the procedure and process today, I think we need to figure out how the utilities can do a better job. When I asked Black and Veatch, what would it take if I didn't have the utility involved in this project? They said, Lisa, we would have been done in a year. And so we're over 2 years right now. And so I think it's things like that. And there's no real process with the utilities to provide, this carrot and stick to get us over the curb faster. And there's so many people involved in the utility and so many people coming and going. I think we've had like 6 different project managers. And so there's a lack of experience. And we're the ones that are really trying hard to get it done, but I don't think the same urgency is there. So I think there might be an opportunity to look at that and see what we can do on the rule side so that we get more direct support from the utilities. That would be my first guess, because I think there's a fix there. If someone told me I get it done in a year, but the utilities can't, I think there's a disconnect there.
So on that topic, here we are, application procedures, documentation, aligning. I kind of hear that that's really coming out loud and clear as one of the concerns. And so I feel like there might be a benefit from a side chat there. involving utilities especially in the event that if there's just a way to streamline that process within the utilities. The utilities know what we need. We know what we need to give them. It's streamlined, but yes, you're right. I think that question about a large number of sites is one of those that comes up. That's super important, but I think there's also nuance in there. And that choosing which sites you electrify first should be based on those easiest to electrify to meet your overall fleet compliance. And I think that's a message that the ACF team has carried meeting after meeting. So if that can be part of the integration of the process. But anyway, I don't know enough about this, but I feel like this one really needs further discussion. David, did you want to chime in?
Please, good, great discussion. Appreciate teeing up my question. I have kind of an observation. I work for a public entity. We do wastewater, solid waste. I represent that sector. I can say is, coming from a public entity, it's a very complex process we have to go through for procuring anything. We've been ahead of the curve. We've ordered Class 8 electric vehicles, and kind of reality is, the thoughts and simplification of, yeah, you could get a vehicle, you could get it within a certain time frame. They're all available. We just charging infrastructure is ready to go. That's not reality. It's taking a lot longer than we all thought it would take. It's very complex, very time consuming. And it's to the point where, I work for a governmental agency. I understand the bureaucratic process, and we may have made this too complicated. So what I'm seeing here is we're requiring a lot to be done by the utilities to say, okay, I want to put something in, you go to utility, you have an assessment process. It's very cumbersome, and it's coming from every facility trying to electrify. And we're kind of missing the forest through the trees here in that when you say, Leslie, when you say you have to choose, the facility has to choose something, it's kind of the opposite in my mind of what's the goal here? The goal is to get the most emission reductions. How do we do that throughout the state? And it's almost like you have to say, as a planning EIR or a CEQA document of how do we go about doing this and pick the projects. If you say, I can get the most bang for my buck to go in these particular areas and work with the utilities to say, these areas have the best ability to electrify quickly. Shouldn't that be the target rather than everyone scramble around like chickens with their heads cut off trying to do this when it may not be possible? And we have air districts going and saying, let's put in heat pumps everywhere. And that exacerbates the ability to make good decisions to get emission reductions. So that's kind of me turning it back around and saying, do we have an efficient, streamlined process to get the emission reductions we're seeking? You're just asking that at this point, because I can tell you from my experience, it's going to take a lot longer than we thought, and extensions are only part of the process. It needs to be thought of a little differently as far as how to get to the end of the road here as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I see a lot more hands raised. These are all really good points. We're recording, we're taking notes. I would like to get into because I do think this is hitting into that response time piece and gain a better understanding of the back and forth process, if that's part of the problem. So when and why are utilities response times commonly delayed? At what stage in the process do those delays occur? Who's responsible for the next move? Where are improvements needed to speed up this process? I realize people are talking about just the initial getting your feet in the door and getting the process started, but that question actually feeds into that as well. Are there response times in that perspective as well that would make it so that you don't meet that 2025 or 2027 deadline? Is that maybe something that Mike Tunnell can talk about? Because you have your hand up next. Or would somebody else want to chime in on that subject? Because I want to be sensitive of everybody's time. We are supposed to wrap that up by 3 o'clock.
Say that one more time, Leslie.
Talking
Look
about response times in various process, who's responsible?
Okay. Yeah, and that actually leads into my question because, you know, we have this 1 year lead time to get our exemption into you folks. And it was less clear to me how long the utility timeline is for getting that exemption. How many months do I heard anywhere from 1 to 2 months on, I think maybe LA Water and Power was in that process. So, I mean, you even have lead time ahead of that 1 year deadline on the utility side. And I think it'd be nice to have a firmer understanding of kind of the range of that lead time. And then also on the CARB side, is it just getting you a letter from the utility provider, or do you need to process that and make sure it's adequate? So, and what resources? But the main question I had is, so we're running into this 25 deadline. Everybody should have already had their site assessment and determination whether you have the ability to power what you need to your fleet. But there's people, I'm sure there's fleets out there that haven't even started this process. So that's reality looking at us. So, what do you want them to do? Go buy trucks without power? I don't think anybody wants that. Face fines by CARB? I don't think anybody wants that either. So we need to figure out, how we accommodate this within the rule. Fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, you don't have a waiver for this rule. So we don't know the certainty of when this actually hits. So my question is, are you making any plans on contingency plans of how this will work depending on that waiver process? Because in reality, you may not have approval, or maybe you will, we don't know. And fleets will need to know whether they're, if you get a waiver in the next couple months, are they in compliance and facing fines? So that's kind of what I'm just curious whether you've given any thought to that.
Okay, I'll just cover that one. So in general, the waiver and the delay for the drayage trucks and the high priority fleets associated with it, and again, doesn't apply to the state and local government. We put online what our basic approach is going to be, and I've always recommended with any regulation, and most of them do require waivers, is that fleets plan accordingly, because we are expecting to get the waiver approved. The question as to when, we don't know exactly, so we can't say much about that. But the other to not forget is that the rule as structured is largely, if you have trucks that are past the end of their useful life now, that you have until the end of the year to keep using them. And that useful life ends at generally 18 years or 800,000 miles. So a lot of trucks aren't necessarily going to be there. And then there is the other compliance options within the rule as well. So not everybody necessarily has an immediate deadline. Depends on the compliance option you're using. And we expect fleets to obviously use the option that makes the most sense for them.
So, I mean, I guess,
but yeah,
I guess then the question becomes, if you're on the milestone, is it cheaper to buy electric trucks that you can't plug in if you haven't gotten your infrastructure in a timely manner, or get in non-compliance and face fines from you guys? Is there a third
you
option?
could simplify it. You could simplify it to that. There are. I mean, depending on, again, if you're if you're operating in and out of California, then you because right now is don't bring the trucks here, remove them from your California fleet. There's a possibility as well. And again, if you can get your infrastructure and your trucks ready by March, then doing it by March is clearly better than waiting even longer. But it's ultimately dependent on the specific project. And I think largely even the timeline of, hey, taking action a year ahead of the deadline is in part, it's like, hey, if you're acting prudently, you would be planning a year in advance. And that's part of why that criteria is specified in the regulation. So yeah, if you're gonna wait till last minute,
yeah. So I would just say, I'd echo Rebecca's comments, though. I mean, it's real that, people aren't geared up ahead of time. This rule just came down, not even a half a year ago. So I think that needs to be addressed, and I will conclude there. Thank you.
Matt, oh my goodness. Wait, before I go to the next commenter, is there, I guess we're still looking for constructive solutions for speeding up the process and or linking and aligning those the regulation compliance timelines for the infrastructure delay with where the utilities come in on this. That's kind of where I'm going. Bradley's got his hand up. Maybe I'm going to let you jump ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. And to put this back onto kind of the track on engagement with the utility and some of the delays that we see in response time, some of the common delays, I think a lot of the utilities have lessons learned already that they can help to share. But I think on a fleet perspective, there's a lack of standardization in protocols. As we know, there's a lot of fleets that have a lot of sites that are unique to each individual site. A thought in this scenario, maybe for open discussion, is whether or not there are standardized configurations that can be protocoled, right? Where the utilities and the CPUC, CEC, whoever is coming together to say, this is the standard layout for a 1.5 megawatt switchgear and installation scenario. We have to be able to reach an economy of scale to develop switchgear in a larger capacity at a faster rate and a faster deployment. And it's a lot faster for these companies that are building the switchgear and the transformers if they know exactly what they're building. So if we can come up with some type of a design standard that says this is going to be the standard installation scenario or most suitable utility style for the size and type of charging that's available. I don't know if utility has already developed a lot of those standards, but from my experience so far, it's been kind of hit or miss. It's been customized because every site is unique and every customer has a different thought. But if that's the scenario where we can come up with utilities being able to say, this is based off of this site, this is going to be the design standard, this is going to be the switchgear we're going to use, this is the curbing that we're going to use, X, Y, and Z, it helps to speed up, I think, a lot of the process itself, because a lot of process does end up being in design. Months of design and back and forth and 30%, 60%. But if there's a standard, I think that could help installation from a request to possible, not possible, and then estimated lead time based off of the switchgear that we know we need. I think
Bradley,
that might be helpful.
I love where you're going, and I'm actually planning on this being another topic for a future TRIG. Exactly what you're talking about. So I would love to circle back with you because I think you're bubbling with great ideas. And even to tack on to that, it's not just the planning and design phase. It's also once you have figured out what switchgear you're going to use, it's the turnaround time on getting it delivered. We're talking, 18 plus months, and that goes with transformers as well. So it's this is a subject of a future TRIG. Thank you for bringing it up.
Sorry. Future planning. On the other piece though too, and this is more of a question mark for all of us to the utilities. Recent discussions with local utilities identified that there's limited timelines with CPUC funding for some of their programs. Do the utilities see that as being a prohibiting factor for approvals of applications that are coming through where there's not any identified funding source to support their programs and installations, say in 2026, 2027 construction? That's something that we've struggled with in larger term requests for larger scale projects when we know there's a finite amount of time for the utilities to be able to install with the programs that are at their disposal.
Hey, Brett, this is Ramiro with Southern California Edison.
Well, go ahead, Ramiro.
Sorry, Leslie, for just butting in. No, I think it's Brett, that's definitely a great point. I can tell you, Charge Ready Transport was recently extended an additional 2 years. So we're going through the end of 2026. In tandem with charge ready transport, we also have tariff rule 29, which is distribution up into the meter upgrades. Line extensions is rule 15 and 16 that also provide additional support. So today there's currently several pathways for infrastructure installation success, if you will. Now, taking it back to the points as far as the projects, we start looking at, how do we prioritize sites when there's multi-locations? And guys, one thing I want to share with you guys, at least, for Edison, I know the other utilities here have similar, pathways as well, is we do have what we call a load ICA layer that is for the substation as well as for the local circuit. What that'll let you do is in our Dr. Pep portal, and I can send you guys the links and get you guys trained on that if you guys like to. But in that portal, you actually get the estimated load capacity for both the circuit and the substation, and it is updated daily. Now, it is still an estimate, but we do have that engineered analysis report that we could actually do. It's a $2,000 fee, 6-week turn time, and then you could get the actual capacity that is available, and then what that time is going to take for you to actually get the remaining capacity that you need over X amount of time. So it discloses all that information for you. So as you're looking at prioritizing sites or looking at the long-term fleet electrification plan, you can always start with Dr. Pep, move forward from there. And of course, I'll be available as well as other, subject matter experts on the SCE side on the distribution planning team to assist you guys with that. Now, one thing I did want to note, I mentioned during the presentation, and I apologize, guys, I gave you guys like an hour-long presentation. I think it was like 6.5 minutes flat. But one of them is I mentioned that every charging infrastructure project is a major endeavor. And what I really mean by that, there's so many things that could occur during a project. And I know, Lisa, I was hearing you go about, those issues with your projects and others on today's call. Just know that we identified like 6 major culprits, if you will, as to what could pop up under infrastructure project that could delay your installation. One of them is the type of project. So is it an SCE belt where we're just doing distribution to the meter? Or are we doing both sides of the meter infrastructure? That involves additional work that the utility has to do and other issues that come along with that. We can start getting into site characteristics. So are we doing any sort of, environmental studies that require customer environmental mitigation? Existing underground utilities, right, that we have to go around, like natural gas or gasoline, for example. Site-specific site capacity, permits, clearances, right? So dealing with the local areas having jurisdiction and getting their permission to actually do the work. That's been one that delays projects at times as well. The big one I know has been mentioned a couple times is materials and equipment. So yes, we are seeing long lead times on certain materials, and we are looking at standardization practices, Bradley, to your point about seeing, okay, what is available and what can we do with that switchgear? So those are things that we are working on. And the other one, I think this is an interesting one, is actual customer engagement. A lot of times when we ask for POs and start actually designing sites and getting to that point, we're saying, okay, well, where's a purchase order for the actual chargers? We see that a customer might go from a 60 kilowatt to 180 kilowatt, or there's some sort of a change order on the vehicle acquisition plan if you're going through programs like charge ready transport. Those change orders could delay your process as well. So those are 6 points that we always kind of disclose and letting people know that, yes, there are delays. It's not always on the utility side, but we will help mitigate that as best as possible by having that early fleet utility engagement with us. So once again, I want to leave myself as a resource for the SCE side. Anything you guys need, questions, reach out to me. I'll leave my contact information in the chat. I'll be here to support you guys.
Thank you so much. We only have 15 more minutes. And I was hoping to be able to get into the discussion on the public charging solutions. I think that those are unique, but maybe, charging solutions for folks that don't have infrastructure, but then that really, for this subject today, that really kind of wraps and ties into, the charging as a service providers who are dealing with the same sort of back and forth with utilities that fleets are dealing with. So I feel like this discussion could go farther. And as I'm taking notes here, thinking, how can I channel it? How can I channel it to really get what we're trying to get where we're trying to go? So I feel like I want to circle back with a team on that. But at this point, I'm not really sure, that we're going to be able to. If anybody else has an idea about a solution, what can we do faster? I see Bradley's raising his hand again.
No, I just want to make sure that we can touch with Colin and Matt. They've been waiting very patiently for their hands to be called on. And thank you guys for letting me jump ahead of you.
I'll make it quick. Sorry, this is a question. Sorry, Leslie. It's not an offering of a solution, but I just want to be very clear and just get to narrow the context here. Not SLG fleets, small, less than 50 trucks. Oftentimes I have people asking me the same question, and I've been advising them, and I just want to make sure that this is correct. There is no exemption application procedure for the following scenario. Please correct me if this is wrong. The scenario is this fleet has decided that they prefer fuel cell vehicles. And so they've got a capital plan for $3 million in compression equipment and all kinds of other stuff. So they're committed to hydrogen vehicles. But then they come to a replacement for a vehicle. They don't have the hydrogen fueling infrastructure yet, but there is an electric truck that will meet this purpose. There is no exemption application process for them to say, I don't want that electric truck because I've committed to hydrogen. So I don't have my infrastructure, my charging infrastructure. There is no exemption process for that, right? They would need to buy the electric truck and figure out the electric charging infrastructure.
Tony?
You're describing a scenario where they won't be able to get the fuel cell trucks anytime soon?
Yeah, hydrogen trucks on order, to be delivered, delivered.
Very good. No, I mean, so for state and local government, I know you use the SLG abbreviation just to make sure everybody understands.
Yes.
For the state and local government requirements, the default is that 50% of purchases will be zero emissions starting this year. And so if you're saying they've ordered, I'm just using fake numbers, 5 fuel cell electric trucks and 5 diesel trucks, they're perfectly complying with that requirement. There would be no need for an extension. Period.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if it takes 2 years for the trucks to get there, whichever it is, the diesel or the fuel cell. It's based on the purchase dates, in essence, when they've effectively issued the purchase order for those vehicles. It's the date that the requirements are based on.
Okay.
Thank you, Tony. Colin.
Hey, so to Leslie's point on retail infrastructure, I think that it would help to be able, if CARB could provide some sort of guidance on, for example, what would be feasible to apply for an exemption for. Like, for example, if your closest station is 15 miles away from the garaging location that you're looking at, would that constitute, would it be 50 miles? Something to that sort. And additionally, I have a electric vehicle myself. There's things that you need to consider, fleets need to consider for that, be it, how long you might actually have to wait to plug in. So I think for that, when you're looking at documentation, you're going to have to look at uptime or availability requirements for those, and whether there'll be an availability that would be acceptable for the fleet versus what CARB may see as acceptable. I think, to a similar note, when you're looking at garaging locations, would, for example, if you have, we have a lot of leased locations, if your nearest location to a site that cannot get infrastructure due to a delay is leased and they won't allow infrastructure at that site, does that constitute an exemption? And what would the distance between the next closest site that you can put infrastructure in? Anyway, that's general guidelines for things that can help fleets figure out before they apply for the exemption and help streamline approvals on CARB side is my general point on this.
Okay, thank you. So I want to give Adam a chance to talk. Sorry, Lisa, I know you had your hand up, but you already had a turn. So Adam.
Thank you. And I just wanted to lift up, there were a lot of questions and many awesome in the Q&A section over there, some of which actually referenced some of the issues that you had brought up earlier, Leslie. Is there going to be a written response to that, or can I pull out a couple of those questions for on air.
If you want to respond to one on air right now, that's fine. I can go probably 15 minutes over, but then I have to run to a dentist appointment.
I mean, I think some of these are actually more for Tony rather than
Okay,
myself.
so that's it. I appreciate that, Adam. So how do we want to, Annalisa, let me chime in here. How might we want to proceed in getting some of the responses to the questions that are showing up in the Q&A? Because I think that's not a bad idea.
So we do have a mechanism to respond to questions about provisions in the reg. If I'm reading the notes from the team here, we can pursue it through the ZEV fleet and add them to our frequently asked questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. And if it's pertains to the infrastructure team, we'll find a path for that as well. Yeah. So I think we should probably wrap this up. Appreciate everybody. Annalisa, do you feel prepared to recap some of the highlights?
I have a couple of points, but I wanted to ask our co-chairs if you had thoughts, both from the rule provisions and the infrastructure TRIGs. What are your takeaways from our conversation today? And what do you see as our next steps? And if we don't have any, then I can, maybe I'll start sharing.
I was waiting to hear from infrastructure co-chairs before I chimed in.
Okay.
But I will say, I think for recapping some of the highlights, there's very clearly still lots of apprehension and uncertainty. And that's, I think, to be expected with the rule and the discussions that are happening now. With regard to response times, I think something that still needs clarification, and I hope CARB has some notes to follow up with, is just clarity on where those communications can break down in regards to the utility and the fleets working together to pull something together, or even using a third party, so that there's better solutions to expedite those processes. Namely, to Ramiro's point, change orders. Change orders always slow things down. Reminders to fleets that make sure that you're addressing a request to the utility that is a realistic request, and not something that is outside of the scope to the regulations point. It needs to be comparable to the amount of vehicles that you're electrifying at a site. The hard part for sometimes fleets is we have one site that may only currently have 15 vehicles, but in the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to be over 150 at that site. So there's plans and combinations that need to happen there. Last but not least, I know, Ramiro, you mentioned that the extension to 2026, with the year ahead advance for fleets to have to submit these requests, that really only leaves about 18 months for the application, the submission, and then the final construction by most utilities to complete that. I know 2026 seems like a far way off, but in the reality of infrastructure build, it's a drop in the bucket. It's taken 4 years for an electrification program here with our municipality. So I think 2026 is a good start, but I think it's still raising the question of, is there going to be an impact that is going to be impeding the ability for fleets to participate in those programs, or utilities to advance those initiatives? I know there's efforts on all fronts, but I think the question still lies is, do we see in 2026 there's going to be an issue with infrastructure build with some of that funding falling away? But anyway, that's for next level discussion, I think, for the next
PIG
piece,
funding
maybe.
is going to definitely be another topic as well for our TRIG. Thank you, Bradley. I want to bring you on to mine too, just saying. Any other co-chairs?
I would like to just thank the all of the utilities for providing some more clarity about how you're starting to address these pain points, acknowledging them, putting them there with some timelines and deadlines. I think it would be helpful from a perspective of, hey, for fleets who are engaging here and going through and hitting some of these timelines, what are the remedies? What are the ways that we can document if these have added to challenges, meeting the timelines required for the rules, even to get documentation? So kind of acknowledging that these exist, acknowledging everyone is working towards fixing them. But over the next, 2030, this probably isn't going to be as much of a factor, but over the next 2 compliance deadlines, what can we do from a communication perspective to help people understand how to get through that, how to navigate that? I think in terms of one of the things that didn't come up were how, reference to the challenges fleets have engaging with the utilities, kind of standardization in terms of the information required in order to submit an application, to submit a load study. I think it gets to the request for standardization for design. How can we, build some more of those tools potentially with you to help fleets even before they're able to engage with that process, to understand some of those things and simplify that. I think a lot of questions were coming up in terms of those sorts of things as well. So those sorts of tools, but then the sort of understanding and clarity from the applicant perspective of what can we expect? And if we run into this problem, what are the remedies? What can we present to CARB? What can we do about the challenges that we all know are currently here? And I think, just a real request for more detail in some of the FAQs, more templates, more support for all of us trying to work through these complicated, necessary processes.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And Lisa, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you summed up, Rebecca, kind of where I wanted to go with my thoughts on the information provided by the utilities. I thought that was really, really helpful. And short of sharing Ramiro's email and phone number with every fleet to get personal assistance with tackling their infrastructure path, how can we get information out to fleets about how to engage with utilities effectively, where that information resides, about how to navigate the process? I think that's going to be really helpful. This has been a really interesting conversation between the solutions on the ground infrastructure side and understanding the provisions of the rule itself. And so I'm looking forward to taking a look at the questions that were in the Q&A, seeing where we can incorporate those into the FAQ that we have published. And I see a note that the answers to the Q&A should be shared via email. We can send a link to the Q&A when that's been updated, but we want to make sure that the solutions and answers that we're generating through this dialogue are not just understood within this group. It's a good sized group, but it doesn't represent all of the fleets across the state. So I think a really valuable aspect of this whole process is figuring out how we share out our solutions and our answers out to all affected parties. I am really interested in the conversation that was started around turnkey or standardized design. And look forward to having that conversation in a future TRIG meeting. So appreciate that comment. And with that, I want to thank everybody for participating today. I think these conversations are very valuable, and especially thank you to our presenters today. I thought that really helped set up our conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much. A recording will be posted on the same place you get the calendar and the notices and everything else at the, yes, I know Lisa has her hand raised. Are you fine, Lisa? Because we kind of need to wrap things up. Okay, cool. Yeah, so a recording of this presentation is going to be posted. Hopefully you have an opportunity to grab links. Hopefully the participants that joined as guests had the opportunity to grab links out of the chat. I'm going to try to find ways to share those as well. But again, I appreciate all the folks from Utilities, Ramiro, Greg from LADWP, and Zena from PG&E for joining us, sharing more information about your programs and being open to hear constructive feedback about your process. I think we're just going to keep this dialogue going. And thank you so much. I think with that, we're going to close out the meeting. And Nima, that's the name. Sorry, I missed your name. Appreciate everybody very much. See you later.
Thanks, bye all.
Bye.